So lately, a lot of mangas have been ending. Most notably, we have My Hero Academia, which ended a few weeks ago, and Jujutsu Kaisen, which is ending next month. And with these mangas all ending around the same time, you really start to notice how much shorter new gen mangas have become in comparison to older generations. Now, it seems to just be a trend for newer mangas to just have shorter stories. Again, look at Jujutsu Kaisen, look at My Hero Academia, look at Demon Slayer. All of these mangas have either ended or are very close to ending, and relatively, their stories are pretty short. My Hero Academia is probably the longest new gen there is, and it ended with a bit over 400 chapters. Demon Slayer ended with around 200 chapters, and Jujutsu Kaisen is ending next month with less than 300 chapters. And I know 400, 300, 200 chapters might sound like a lot, but it doesn't really compare to how long anime and manga used to be. Let's take My Hero Academia, which was the longest new gen that I can think of. It had about 430 chapters, and it was airing for 10 years. 10 years is a long time for an anime. But let's take a look at older animes. Let's look at the big three. We have Bleach, the shortest one in the big three, and that was going on for 15 years. Bleach has just a little bit under 700 chapters. Naruto has 700 chapters and now has Boruto, which is only continuing the series even more. And One Piece hasn't even ended and has over 1,100 chapters. So what's changed from back then till now? Why are mangas just getting shorter and shorter and shorter? Well, I have a few answers to this question, and the first answer I can think of as to why stories are just shorter nowadays is because mangas are just simpler than they were before. Now, simpler doesn't mean that they are written worse. They just lack the depth that previous stories had. The biggest example showing the lack of depth in new gen mangas stems from the world building. The reason why a lot of series like Bleach, One Piece, and Naruto were so long was because their worlds were so full of lore and there was so much to explore in them. How many new gens can you think of that have interesting worlds? Off the top of my head, the only one that comes to mind is Black Clover. Black Clover is the only new gen I can think of that has an interesting world to explore. New gens like My Hero Academia, Jujutsu Kaisen, Sakamoto Days, Demon Slayer, none of those have interesting worlds because there's a trend for new gen mangas to have their story take place in the real world. All those stories I just mentioned, all of them take place in Japan during some time period. And it's not impossible to have world building taking place in the real world. But these mangas don't do that. Most of their stories take place strictly in Japan, and no other country or any part of the world plays any significance whatsoever. I mean, take a look at One Piece, for example. One Piece has over 1,000 chapters and has been going on for nearly 30 years. And that is because of how big the world in One Piece truly is. And I know One Piece is in its final saga, but if Oda wanted to, he could easily continue One Piece for another 10 years just because of how much lore there is. And let's not just look at One Piece alone, because I know One Piece is a crazy outlier being over 1,000 chapters long. Let's look at Bleach. Bleach is a manga that also takes place in our real world. Ichigo literally resides in Japan. However, despite the fact that it has our world, it also has so many worlds on top of that. You have Soul Society, you have Hueco Mundo, and now we're getting the Bleach Hell arc soon, which will explore a whole new realm of Bleach, that being Hell. All these different realms add so much lore and depth to the story of Bleach, which is why it was able to go on for nearly 700 chapters. It has gotten countless amounts of light novels, it has gotten spin-offs, and now it's possibly getting a continuation to its manga. And that's because of how interesting and how depthful the world of Bleach truly is. Naruto, in my opinion, is the weakest in the big three when it comes to world building. However, the world of Naruto still has tons of depth, which is the only reason why Boruto is continuing. We are literally exploring extraterrestrial beings, meaning there is so much more to the entire Naruto universe than we've seen before, which is what gives all of these series the capability to go on for so long. It's just how much lore there is behind their series, which stems from how developed the worlds are. So modern new gens have literally no way of exceeding the 500 chapter mark without making the story feel really dragged on and really repetitive, because there's nothing left to explore. If they beat the main villains of the story, what else is there left? They can't really introduce anything new because their world is not developed enough. Another reason why I feel like manga is just significantly shorter now is because the priorities have changed. A lot of new gen mangas more so prioritize the fights and how many fights there are in the series. Like in Jujutsu Kaisen, for example, there's a fight in almost every other chapter. Ever since the Shibuya arc, there was a fight every like 3 chapters in Jujutsu Kaisen. There's just a lot less chapters nowadays that are purely dedicated to character growth and development. Most new gen mangas have to have fights sprinkled in pretty consistently throughout the series. Older gen mangas weren't afraid to go a long period of time without having a fight because they prioritized their characters' development and growth more so than the actual fights. And I feel like it's like this because the audience themselves have changed a lot over the years. People seem to not really care about character development anymore. As long as they're getting really cool and fun fights every other week, they're happy. It doesn't matter if the characters are severely underdeveloped or not. All that matters is the cool action and fights. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's just a big change from older gen to new gen, which is another reason why mangas are so significantly shorter, because they don't develop their characters as well. And honestly, I don't blame manga authors for focusing on fights more so than the actual depth of their story, because clearly it's working. Take a look at Demon Slayer, for example. I personally love Demon Slayer, but I even can admit that Demon Slayer is not the most complex anime out there. It's a very simple anime with a basic formula. Almost every single arc follows the exact same format, which is Tanjiro and the gang accompany a Hashira to a new place, they fight an upper moon, and so on and so forth for multiple arcs. However, it works because the fights turn out amazing and people read it for the pure action of it. And obviously, the more fights a manga has, the better the animation is going to be once it gets animated, and the more it will explode and people will fall in love with it. That is exactly what happened to Demon Slayer. Demon Slayer as a manga was already very popular for its very simple yet enjoyable format. But once the anime released and people saw how crazy the animation went for the fight, everyone fell in love with the series. I mean, Jujutsu Kaisen is another example. It's not the most complex or best written series out there, but the fights make up for whatever it's lacking. And this is very clearly shown with the Gojo versus Sukuna fight. I mean, this fight was so hyped up, so intense, that the entire anime community was split into 2 sides because of it. So clearly, the format for these new gen mangas is working. Fights are the priority, and fights are what people want to see. So of course, they're gonna focus more on fights than actual character development, which ultimately makes the series that much shorter. At the end of the day, it all comes down to preference and what you're looking for in a story. For example, I personally enjoy the older generation of mangas because their worlds are more developed, their characters are more developed, and it just feels like the story has so much more depth. And if any of the older generation manga authors wanted to continue their story, they could very easily because of how developed their worlds are. However, it's no secret that majority of people now prefer the new format of shonen mangas, which is mainly based around fights and how cool they are. And hey, it works. It's why series like Jujutsu Kaisen and Demon Slayer are so popular in the first place. There's nothing wrong with them using this new format. However, that's why mangas have become so much shorter. It's because they don't have developed worlds and they don't really focus on their characters as much anymore, unfortunately. In fact, the only reason My Hero Academia was so long in the first place was because it's one of the few new gen mangas that took a lot of time to actually develop the characters. If not, I doubt the series would have even went past 300 chapters. Anyways, with all that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and make sure to like and subscribe and let me know what you guys want to see next. I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you guys on the next one.